Hi, welcome to the channel. This is part 3 of the Aldi versus Lidl two-man tent test. So this time we are taking the Lidl tent up to a mountain, Cafe Narusted at 619 metres, and giving it a good test on a very rainy and windy night, camped just below the mountain summit, about 5 or 6 metres from the trig point, about 617 metres. So it was a pretty miserable night of weather. The weather wasn't much better in the morning either, so I couldn't really do much filming because my cameras were getting wet. So I'll cut now to myself in the tent, having just pitched it in near darkness. It wasn't the easiest pitch ever. It started quite well because again it's an all-in-one pitch, so I was able to lay it out, peg down the enders into the wind, and then start feeding the poles through. But as it's a two-man tent, it would be easier with two people to actually feed the poles into the far end, because the poles don't come through. They go into one end of the sleeve and then they fix into the other end of the sleeve into a little slot. So getting them into that, you've got no leeway to push or pull the pole. You've just got to try and shove the whole thing through. And when it jams, you've got to go to the other end and try and feed it through a bit, and then try and go back to the other end and push it through a little bit more. And then when you're trying to get the other pole in, the other poles start to move out, and it's just a real nightmare. My hands were wet, it was raining, so the poles kept slipping, so it was really hard to get them into the pole. There's little plastic hoops they go into. So that was really difficult. The top pole, I had to do that a couple of times as well, because again, it goes into a little plastic hoop, so you put it into one side, as you know, nicely. You'd walk around to the other side, the wind was blowing, it would come out the other side, so you put it back in and do that. You know, again, with two of you it would be a piece of cake, but with one person, you can't reach over the tent because it's too big to do it. You've got to go around. And it took me, I think, 4 times before I got round and it didn't pop out the other side in the wind, and I was able to get that set up. So yeah, a little bit annoying. But on the flip side, because it's outer and in a pitch together if you want it to be, even with all the faffing about, the inner tent is still perfectly dry, and all the rest of it, considering it was raining and blowing rain, that was fine. So yeah, not the easiest tent to pitch, but I think the trade-off for that is all this lovely interior space, masses of headroom. No matter where you are in the tent, it's a really nice spacious tent, and when you are really quite wet and fed up and having sworn a few times, to be able to get all the stuff in the tent and have all this space around me is really good. So first impressions of being in the little tent properly, so far I feel really quite confident in the tent. The end that's pitched into the wind is hardly moving at all. The tent's not that flappy either, to be honest, it's quite quiet. The guy lines, I like them. There's obviously 4 guy lines off, one off each pole, the main poles. So it's obviously only one guy line, but it comes off of 2 points from the pole. So you get, you know, better rigidity on the poles from the one guy. I'm using the top pocket for my car key and my wireless headphones and stuff. It feels absolutely fine at the moment. I'm sat directly on the ground sheet at the moment. It feels a tiny bit damp, but that's because I am I am damp and I'm making it damp. I got damp socks, I got damp underwear. It was a pretty damp walk up, but quite enjoyable. It's got nice ventilation, so I feel confident it's not going to be too much condensation in here, given that obviously I've got a lot of wet gear in here and stuff. That is one of the dangers, you get more condensation, but no, there's plenty of ventilation. But the ventilation is nice and high up, so you won't feel a cold breeze, I don't think, during the night. Well, the tent is still up. It's about 5 to 7 in the morning. Really heavy rain for a good few hours. Quite high winds throughout the night. I'd say at least 30 miles an hour. The weather forecast was saying that. Definitely felt like it. But the tent has done really well. It's been really solid. The wind has been from the back of the tent coming up over the mountain, past a little trig point that's just a few metres behind me, and it's actually been hitting the tent and sort of brushing over it quite nicely. The tent, considering how tall it is, I was really worried it's just going to be absolutely catching the wind and really getting pushed. But no, you can hear the wind absolutely whistling along, and it's just skimming over the top, and occasionally when the wind changes direction a little bit, you get a bit of shake side to side.
but at no point have I felt at all worried about anything. It's felt really, really solid, and it felt like it was not really being tested a great deal, despite the fact it was pretty rough at times. So it's done really, really well. Really solid tent. I mean, for £40, it is a really good buy. The vent, that's completely bone dry this morning. During the earliest period where the wind was heaviest and the rain was heaviest, there was like the odd drop coming through the vent, but for the last few hours there's been absolutely nothing, despite it raining quite heavily and the wind still being up. So the vent's not a problem. The pole design keeps it really solid, and especially the additional pole at the top just keeps that shape nicely. So yeah, it's done much better than I expected. I would say it's certainly quieter than the Aldi tent. It doesn't flap as much, despite being much taller. So that's one of the strange things. Like, I think I would have felt more comfortable in the Aldi tent last night when I was pitching, just because it's so much lower. You just think, well, it's going to catch a lot less wind. It's got to be much stronger in the wind. And I think when I was in the Aldi tent last time and the wind was really high, I was like, I'm not sure if the little tent would have coped with that. But now I'm not so sure. I think the little tent would have coped with that, because despite how tall it is, the design is really solid. So at no point did I have any sort of fear last night of the tent being blown away. To the extent that I didn't pack away my camera, didn't do anything to be ready in case the tent failed. I just left all my gear out, really confident that there was going to have no issues. The only thing I was slightly worried about at one point when it was really windy was the guy lines at the end that was taking the wind. I was just wondering whether, because I had pitched in a bit of a hurry and pitched when it was pretty dark, and I think did I really put those two pegs in properly? But because of the way I pitched the tent, I could open the door at each side and just poke my nose out in the early hours of the morning and visibly check the guy lines, and they were still in and still fine. But again, if I was going to make a really cheap upgrade, I would just use a couple of my titanium stakes, just 4 of them, 1 on each guy line, and then with the little pegs, with the titanium stakes, they've got a pull on them, so I would just use that pull to double peg them, so the guy lines would not be going anywhere, and that to me would just resolve that little concern about how well the guy lines are pegged out. Well, it's nearly 9 o'clock now. Finally got out the tent. As you can see, it's really misty, a lot of damp in the air, but the tent did absolutely brilliantly. Rain heavy for most of the night, lots of wind. It handled it really well, and the shape, it just seems to shed the wind really well. So really, really impressed with it. It's a really solid, comfortable, big tent. So obviously the big drawback is the 2.75 kilos in weight. There's no getting around that. That is pretty heavy. If you split it between 2 of you, it'd be an absolute breeze. But for one person, I would take it out again, and I would take it out rather than the Aldi tent, I think, despite the weight saving of the Aldi tent. This is definitely a good wet weather tent, because you've got plenty of space to move around inside, so you get in soaking wet, you can get changed, you can sort yourself out, you've got plenty of space for your wet gear and stuff. Obviously you can sit up really comfortably all around the tent. It's just a really nice tent, so you can see in the background the trig point. So you can see how close we were pitched to the summit there, and that's 619 metres. It was good, solid 25 to 30 plus mile an hour winds, good 3, 4, 5 hours of rain, a lot of that quite heavy as well. The inside is bone dry, the ground sheet stayed dry. The only dampness I had inside the tent at all was from my wet pack, because that was absolutely soaking wet. I had soaking wet trousers, soaking wet waterproof and stuff. But no, really, really good tent. So for £40, I think it's a really good buy. I'm really impressed by the materials, really impressed by the strength. The double going out points on the poles are really good. I didn't feel at all worried last night about it. I was anxious coming out because the forecast was for higher winds than we experienced. So I was a little bit nervous. One of the reasons I came up here is I know there's quite a lot of lumps and bumps and stuff, so I thought I could get a fairly sheltered spot. But by the time I actually got up here and it was dark, I just pitched on a sort of the flattest spot I could find near the summit. There's a tiny bit of shelter from a little patch of grass behind the tent, but no, we're pretty exposed up here, so it's had a really good test. So I'd highly recommend this tent. They are still available on eBay. I saw one go for a tenner the other day, and I missed it because I was driving home, and I missed the auction, so a little bit disappointed about that. But no, really, really good little tent. If you do see one, yeah, definitely pick one up. For 40 quid, I don't think you can go far wrong. Obviously, durability will have to tell over time, but I can't see any obvious weak points. With the Aldi tent, obviously, found an obvious weak point that was already damaged after just 2 pitches, whereas this tent, I can't see any obvious failure points. The only slightly frustrating thing with the pitch last night, as you can see, which I shall zoom in and show you, this pole is in the proper outer hook, and this pole is actually hooked to the inner one. The outer pole is there. I just could not get it in last night. I put it into the wrong, sounds dodgy, I put it into the wrong hole originally, and then by the time I realised it was fully pitched the tent, and I just could not get enough slack to move the pole into the correct one. So that's the only slight thing I had issue with it last night, but obviously didn't affect the performance. And if I was going to pitch it again, now I've got a bit more experience with the tent, obviously I'd recognise that the end where the pole is exposed should go into the wind, because then that leaves the doors sheltered, so you can open the doors and the wind's blowing past you, you can do a bit of cooking and stuff absolutely fine. Whereas when I pitched it, as soon as you open the doors, the wind's coming straight in, so, and the rain obviously. But no, if you've enjoyed the video, please drop it a like. It really does help to promote the videos and the channel and stuff. And if you aren't subscribed but you like this kind of budget stuff, this is absolutely the channel for you, because I've got a lot of budget tents coming up. I've got a lot if you look at my previous playlist as well. And obviously if you want to check out more on the Aldi versus Lidl thing, I'll link to the playlist in the description. So do subscribe, do drop a like, do say hello, and I will be doing some giveaways in the next couple of months as well of some gear. So once I get that sorted out, I will do that. So yes, thanks for watching if you've made it this far. Really appreciate it, and I'll catch you in the next one.